Cropland, and I am here with Ag Ventures, a Facebook page that I have created for agricultural education for all ages. So today we're here with Joe Brager, and he's going to introduce himself a little more and why we're here.
Thank you, Kendra. Yes, that's right. Joe Brager, farm with my family, my brother, my mother, right here in wonderful Buffalo County, part of the Buffalo Trempealeau or Trempealeau Buffalo Farmer Network. And we farm about 1,400 acres, and we have about 350 dairy cows. We also raise poultry for Pilgrim's Pride. That's right, it's Pilgrim's, its name has changed a few times.
Pilgrim's
so
Pride.
It's Pilgrim's Pride now. I'm used to saying Golden Plump. Typically we grow forage, alfalfa, corn silage down in the valley. Right now we're up on the ridge looking at some of the corn. We also grow soybeans and winter rye that we use for cover crop seed. And we do some other small grains experiments, and over the past have also dabbled a little bit with industrial hemp. And there's one other neat part that you might be able to get a picture of when we get back down in the valley. Something that I'm proud of is we also work with the local sportsman's club, the Elk Rod and Gun Club, and we have a trout rearing pond on our farm where typically we raise about 4,000 fish a year that are stocked in rural streams.
So how long have you been farming versus how long has the farm been here?
How long have I been farming? Oh my gosh, well, I've been farming almost my entire life. Grew up on the farm. My parents came over from Switzerland in the 60s. They both came separately, and they just thought this area reminded them of home a little bit because it's about as steep a place as you can get. I've often wished that they came from the Ukraine and they would have went somewhere nice and flat. But definitely scenic, definitely a lot of wildlife, but it also has its challenges.
Oh yeah. So you briefly mentioned who's all involved in the farm. Is there anybody else that you wanted to include in that?
I have to clarify right now, when I say we have chickens, that's really not me. That's my brother and my wife Noelle, who's also a teacher in Wamandy, St. Boniface.
All right. So you obviously mentioned that we are on a hill. So is that mostly what you farm, is hills and valleys?
That's all we farm is hills and valleys. That's pretty characteristic of the driftless area. Our slopes, I think our steepest slope that we have might approach 40%. Our average slopes, I'm sure, are 20% plus. Have very little, very flat land, so obviously erosion, runoff, all of those things are very important. This land that we're on right now has been monitored because it all drains down to the valley. And what I'm awful proud to say, that I think it was 7 years of monitoring through Discovery Farms, all but 2% of precipitation that lands on this land up here stays. So we're only losing less than 2% of the precipitation in runoff. And that comes from the use of cover crops. That comes from the use of leaving residue behind, doing no-till, having those macro pores. And then even at that point, we didn't have the strip along the edge, but I'm sure that's a contributing factor as we go into the future as well to keep a lot of that here in place. Oh yeah.
So do you want to just describe to everybody what a typical crop rotation looks like within these hills and valleys?
So it changes all the time. Okay, typically, I mean, you go back, we started out, you know, we'd start from the beginning. We probably had a hay field. Eventually, you would have plowed that up. You would have put corn in, worked it up again, put oats in with alfalfa. At this point, this farm is 100% no-till, very important on this land. And our rotations up on this ridge top are, what we'll typically have is corn bean up here. We always put cover crops interseeded into our soybeans so that they'll hold that soil because it's the most vulnerable right after that soybean crop. And then we started putting some small grains in, especially winter rye that we use for cover crop seed. Down in the valley, a lot of that area takes care of the dairy farm. So we have done many different rotations. The newest one that I'm very excited about is we'll be seeding tomorrow. We just ran after the seed today. We'll put out a forage rye after our corn silage that we want to put to new seeding.
Okay.
That'll go in this fall. Next spring, somewhere around May 15th in that time frame to May 18th, we've been very fortunate. We take off our alfalfa and that winter rye all at once and blend it together in the bunker. We've had excellent feed quality off of that. Following that, we will terminate that rye that acted as a cover and a forage, and we will go ahead and plant in. This year we did millet, last year we did Sudan grass, the dwarf hybrid. And this year when we took the millet off at about 38 inches, we had tremendous tonnage, we had protein as high as 20%, and feed digestibility close to corn silage. So we had an absolute tremendous feed. We got 2 cuttings off of that, and those fields that went through that rotation are getting seeded or just got seeded here the other day, and they're wrapping up this afternoon down in the valley. Very excited and putting that in no-till. So really as one crop is leaving, the other one's always coming up. And the more we can do that, the more we can keep this green, the more we protect the soil, the biological activity, and all of that.
Right.
So one of the things, I know, Kendra, when you ask again, why did we put this strip down here? And one of the challenges I talked about is the decreased crop performance. Because if you look here, see all of that shade? Then you see those big trees, they pull a tremendous amount of moisture. But ultimately, the way this field faces with the sun coming in like this, a lot of this area is shaded. And so when we grow those crops right up to the woods line here, the trees are stealing moisture, and the shade is absolutely killing our crop growth. So that's why we've backed away from these areas. And again, you'll see here earlier when we came through, there's a turkey the other day. The deer came shooting across. It was dangerous to drive even. But this kind of works a little bit for the wildlife and everything.
All right. So what's the typical soil type on the farm, or does it vary from field to field?
It'll vary somewhat, but up here, this is kind of a heavy clay.
Okay.
It's fair to say that over the centuries, over time, and especially during the era when a lot of this was heavy into wheat and all of that, a lot of this ended up down in the valley, leaving this heavy clay. Right. And so, again, everything you can do up here to get that water to go in, I think is outstanding, because it does have if it's not covered, if it's not protected, it'll get dried out and become very hard. And then when it's very hard like that, that's when it likes to shed water. So keeping it covered is very important. Certainly we have some of our darker soils, but we have and the names have changed. So excuse me, I memorized the old names, the Norden, the Fayette. That's the kind of soils we have here.
All right. So is there anything else that you want to add about the landscape of the farm, or just the farm in general?
Beautiful country, but it's a challenge. You know, it's four-wheel drive or bust on some of these things. But there is a way to farm even the most challenging land. If you want to adapt to that landscape and do what's right, you can make it work just about anywhere.
So why don't you share with us where this group is located and anything else that you want to add about this group?
Well, I'm part of the Buffalo Trempealeau or Trempealeau Buffalo Farmer Network. Depends what side of the line you're on, how we say it. But we're part of the Middle Trempealeau watershed, and it's just a great group of farmers from this area that have gotten together to do a lot of neat stuff.
So why did you choose to join this group, and what were your expectations going in, and how have they changed?
Well, I just love getting together with a group of innovators. And my expectation is that we would be probably more hearing from people things we could do, but it very quickly evolved that I developed a lot of respect for the people that I'm getting together with and looking at these, because everybody brings something very unique to the table. It doesn't take long when somebody throws out a challenge that people are throwing ideas out how we can solve it, and I think that's what we're really getting the most out of this, is the idea sharing, the willingness of people to try things, and then to share their experiences. And when I know somebody that's doing this in my neighborhood and I can see it, that adds value because I trust these folks. You know, in this area we have a lot of slopes. Of course, we're in a driftless area. So runoff is always an issue. We worry about water quality because the other great feature of the driftless area is about every valley has a stream in it. And so we're really looking, a lot of what we're doing is about keeping soil in place, keeping nutrients in place, and preserving our water quality.
So what conservation practices or innovative approaches is your group doing well?
Well, I think there's been a great amount of enthusiasm in interseeding cover crops. A lot of the interseeding in soybeans, for instance, as soon as these leaves start to turn prior to dropping, we'll take a rogator and we'll be putting a rye mix out here. And so as those leaves drop, they tend to mulch that seed. And my favorite story about that is I had a man combining for me, and I had not had a chance to go look how successful or not successful that original rye seeding was. I was very concerned that perhaps it would be too good, and then we'd have all this rye coming up and it would cause trouble combining. And so the guy got there with the combine before me, and he called me and he said, "We got a problem." I said, "What's my problem?" He goes, "You got terrible weed control out here and you need to do something. It looks like a lawn." And I said, "Looks like a lawn, well, how's the yield?" He goes, "Well, the yield is great." I go, "Okay, well, is the combine getting through it?" "Yeah, that's going okay, but you got such a terrible weed problem." I go, "Okay, do you think I'll still be able to round bale up some of the stubble?" He goes, "Yeah, I think that'll be fine. But you got a problem?" I go, "No, I got a great success, because everything we needed, the stubble, the grain, the combining, all of that worked, yet we had that, what he called a lawn coming up through, so that that ground could be protected."
And that was all rye?
That was all rye. That was fantastic. Some of the other things, you know, a lot of the other groups, they're not other groups, but farmers in our group are also looking at how to interseed into standing corn and a lot of those things, and we'll watch that close. I'm always a little leery because I can't hardly stand on some of my slopes. Not sure I could follow a row, but that's part of the thing that's neat. Everybody has a little different landscape, and everybody's learning how to work in theirs.
Right. So how would a farmer reach out to participate in this group if they had an idea or if they wanted some more information?
Call any one of us, okay? And so, you know, I'm not sure if you listed or whatever, but I don't mind throwing my number out. If you want, write it down, 715-530-0466. We've got Scott Stippenich with us. Amber Additz up at Discovery Farms would be able to direct folks this way, or, you know, we got Brian Malashevsky and your dad, Shane Goplin. Just reach out to any one of us, and we'd be happy to tell you when our meetings are to involve, because the more of us working together, the more ideas we have.
Right. All right. What else would you like to share before we close up this part of the video? Before we close up this part,
this is one of the things I've been working on, and we're going to talk about that probably a little more as we drive around. But we've noticed a little while ago that once we started planting way up to those trees, and my favorite thing is always hearing how terrible a deer damage we have, because nothing grows around the outside of the field. I'm starting to think it's not as much deer damage as the shade from the trees pulling up moisture. So we've done some experimenting. Again, we'll talk more about that later, of just leaving about 30 feet, maybe 40 feet around the edge of our grain fields up here on the ridge, and putting in seeding grass and staying back. If you look, as long as we're here, you know, the first row is a good row. I'll show you an example in corn later on, what corn looks like when it's up against the woods. So we're actually saving money doing less.
So what are we looking at as we drive around, and why did you decide to do this?
Well, this is, I noticed years ago, and I was always planting right up to the very edge of the woods up here. And, you know, part of that was you want to use the whole field because you rent the whole field. And then the other part of that also had to do is I always felt, well, if I plant all the way to the edge, the brush won't grow, right? Especially in today's economy, I started thinking that it's pretty expensive to try to control brush with corn. And maybe there's another way to do this more economical. And one of the other things that also happened is the land we're driving on right now is something I rent. And the folks that come out here really like to enjoy their property. And if I'm right up tight to the woods, they can't get around it either. And just like we're driving around it now, they'll use these paths throughout the year to go through. And I was always very curious, because I'm still paying the rent on this. How am I coming out? And I'm very happy, and Scott will talk about that a little bit later on. We've done the math on it. My assumption was correct. I can actually, on the field level and on a per acre level, I'm coming out ahead not farming this, even though I'm paying some rent on it. I've been very fortunate. I've been on a couple fields that I have. The landlord has enjoyed this so much that they've actually taken it out of the rent. And so it's very useful. It also serves as somewhat of a filter strip. And the area at the bottom of this field, that's where when it starts going into the woods, just like we're feeling right now, is most vulnerable. So this also helps to shore that up and preserve soil movement.
So what were your considerations about planting, timing, and then long-term maintenance with these grass strips?
The planting wasn't too big of a deal. We just seeded it 1 year, backed off. The other consideration is if you ever have somebody come in and touch up spray for you, you've got to make sure to remind them that the strips are here, because they have a tendency to boom out too far and kill them because they think it's just weeds, but it's not. It's actually been seeded to fescue and orchard grass. Did I tell you fescue and orchard grass? We felt those would be the most shade tolerant grasses we could put out here. We have also dabbled a little bit, and we're going to start putting a little more clover mix into some of these areas. Again, it helps with wildlife out here. And the management at this point, if this goes really well, and the grass, now this is, we seeded it last year, it's the second year. I bush hogged this area. This is very rocky up here. So I've just been, at this point, bush hogging it, and I don't think we've calibrated in, you know, Scott, we haven't calibrated in a hay crop. We've considered this sitting idle, right, in our calculations. So maybe as this develops a little better and I can condition it a little bit with the bush hog, eventually if we get a really dry year, we might just go ahead and try to hay some of this as well. At least one time per year. I don't want to take it off too many times, but to hit it a couple times wouldn't be a bad thing.
So you mentioned the bush hog. So is there any other equipment that you use to maintain this?
Nope, that'll be it. We're still gonna, if you look, you see some of the trees leaning in. We're still gonna go after a couple of those, because even if you're out here bush hogging or cutting, you don't really want those things hitting your cab. But this strip also affords me the ability to do it throughout the year. I could be doing it right now because I wouldn't be affecting my cropping here. So you see one right up ahead here. I've got my eye on that one.
So what, you said that this practice is fairly new. Have you faced any challenges with it?
The biggest challenge I had to overcome, the idea of just leaving this. That was the biggest. Other challenges, it was a no-till drill. Again, very rocky up here, so we no-till everything on our farm. So as far as challenges, the biggest thing was my own psychological. I've always been driven to farm every possible piece of the farm. And it was really having that shift to thinking that it's okay to leave this, especially when it comes out from an economic value, that it's okay to leave this. And really everybody's winning. I win economically. The landlords win because they have great access to their property. Wildlife wins. And ultimately this does create some stability at the edge of the field here before it leads into the woods. And the wildlife also have a corridor that they can utilize.
So when you were determining which parts of the field were going to be left, which fields did you consider and why?
Well, up here, the first thing I'd love to do is leave any one, depending which way the sun. Those were my priorities. Okay. If the sun is shining into it like this over here, you're not getting the same effect. But if the trees were on this side of the field and that shade is carrying across, those are the first areas. Now this is really the beginning, and again, we're going to kind of turn that over to Scott a little bit. I just took out these field edges, okay, because I was concerned about the shading and also the moisture that the trees pull. But I think we can take a deeper dive into this as well and find parts of a field that are least productive. And we might in the future see that, oh, there's a spot over there that is no longer farmed. But I also want to be able to maintain the brush on these fields. And so I have the access to do that now. With the bush hog, I keep them back. And you know, the guy running the combine likes me a lot better too when he isn't brushing up against all these branches.
Oh yeah. Did you utilize ag consulting services, conservation programs, or anybody else when you were starting to plan this or while this was going on?
You know, I can't take the full credit. I'm sure somewhere along the line some of this was discussed, but really the consulting, for the large part, I wanted to make sure I was planting the grass that would grow in these conditions, and other than that, this was not part of a program of any type. So we haven't even factored, you know, if it were like a set aside or something like that. This is just something that started to make sense.
Have you considered using this practice on other fields?
Yes, the plan is to do more. I'll give you an example. This strip, this is a pretty large ridge here, and it's multiple farms pieced together. This strip and that little narrow strip you drove on, in its entirety amounts to 29 acres. So we're talking, if that were a field, it'd be a pretty decent sized field.
Right.
And it is kind of neat. It takes me 3 hours to get all the way around all these fields with the bush hog.
Okay. And to give somebody a perspective, an acre is about equivalent to a football field, correct?
Oh, perfect.
All right.
I'll have to take your word for it. I've never measured out a football field, but that's a pretty good example. Wow.
That's how I've been taught. So how has your producer-led group supported you in doing this practice?
Actually, that's where I had the opportunity to meet Scott. Prior to that, I was just doing this because I had to look for a more economical approach than to grow corn where it doesn't like to grow. And then what I so enjoyed was when Scott took the time to put the numbers together and really show, using GPS and all of that, what my true cost was. And in essence, those discussions help validate this. Now that it's been validated, we are going to be looking at more areas to do this with. I still, you notice, those pieces, I still believe, remember I told you want to work every part of the farm? That they're not abandoned. They're not going to go to weeds and mess and burdock. That's why when we're driving through it now, it's nice grass. So we are going to continue to manage it. And again, hopefully that management, as this mellows out along that edge, will lead to being a hay crop. Okay. I'm a little worried because of the shade and drying out hay, but that's the next step, and then we're in really good shape. So here we're going to go around, and there might be a few bumps, but this is an example just a little further down the road where we did this with a cornfield.
Okay. Are you the only member of this group that's doing this, or are other members doing it as well?
Gosh, Scott, you might you want to weigh in on that right now? I guess I know I've been kind of starting up here, and I know a lot of farmers. What I want to tell you, it might not be a strip, it might be a waterway or different things. I'm not sure if we have quite a few guys worried about the woods to this extent, but not every farmer has this amount of woods piled right up tight to their fields. But this is not, you know, the sad part is, somebody might just look at this as a strip or a hay strip or anything else. So it's not really a new idea by any means. It's just kind of going back some of the old things that worked for us too.
All right. Do you know of anyone outside of the group that's been doing this, or are you kind of the only one that you know outside?
No, certainly there's guys outside, and again, that's a lot of the work that Scott has done working with farmers. I believe our last year's Leopold winner, Jeff Lake, has been doing some of this work as well, and those numbers are truly fascinating. There.
Oh, there's a turkey.
Turkey ahead. Well, earlier here as we were going along, I mentioned a man by the name of Scott quite a few times, and I guess I'd like to introduce Scott Stippenich with Pheasants Forever. He's also collaborating with our watershed group and doing a lot of effort in keeping us all organized and helping us to document the things we're doing and validating some of these processes. And he has with him a flip chart here, and he's done some economic analysis on this strip. And so, Scott, if you'd like to tell us about it.
Yeah, really driving down at the economics of the field and kind of what makes decisions on the farm, or at least one component of it. So we have this field here that we're standing in, and looking at it by the numbers. So this field was corn in 2017, then it was soybeans in 18, and 19 and 20 it was corn again. And so what we're looking at is 2017 and comparing 2017 to 2019. So the way you you laid it out, you know, this strip was installed in 2019. So going back to the beginning, 2017, it was a little over a 30-acre field. The strip, that's about 30 feet wide, took out about 5 acres of the field.
It adds up, doesn't it?
Yeah, incredible. But so the numbers on the field are pretty, I mean, they tell the whole story, really. So in 2017, it was about 190 bushel corn. By taking this 30-foot strip out, you increase your bushels by almost 20
on the
bushels
remaining,
per acre.
on my average here.
Yep, on your average for the field at 209 bushel. And the rest of the numbers follow. You know, so your profit went up about $6 an acre. And that's counting in this 5 acres. So you're paying land rent on this.
And so that, I think that's important. You factored in the fact that we're still paying pretty heavy land rent on this, and it still works out.
Yep. You're just not spending those other inputs that you would be on the rest of the cornfield. So by taking out 5 acres, you're actually making $200 more on the field as a whole.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it. So now I've done a strip, but you've got experience working with some other farmers, and it might not be a strip, or it might be a wet spot, or what do you work with there?
Yeah, really, you know, it depends on the management of the farm. That's going to depend on which areas we can take out and which makes sense. But certainly headlands have popped up. You know, these borders are a common one. You know, and putting them into grass is one example, but I have other farmers that are putting it into cover crops, you know, so they're going to grow rye on it and harvest the rye and use that for cover crop seed on the rest of the farm. That's more profitable. You know, the others are taking advantage of some of the programs that are out there.
So there's opportunity for that, and we haven't done any of that here, but that would change these returns as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot of options out there. You know, so I work very closely with our USDA NRCS office. That's where a lot of the programs are, but our land and water department and whatnot, and there's other groups out there that are willing to support farmers in finding, you know, farming the best and conserving the rest.
Yes, yep, you got it, yep. So, well, thank you for doing this for me, because it, again, sometimes not everything I try works out perfect, but I think this one's a winner.
Yeah, you know, it's my pleasure to work with you and the other farmers of the Buffalo Trempealeau Watershed Group. You know, there's great stories to be told, and excited to be working with you.
Thanks, Scott.
Well, thank you, Joe, for coming out and talking to us today. And don't forget to check out the other videos of the other conservation practices that the area farmers in this group are doing.